Dan the Artman's Book Reviews, Episode 77, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I really enjoyed this book. I laughed a ton. Holden Caulfield, the main character, cracks me up. He would be fun to hang out with. I love his sense of humor, even though he spends much of this story lonely and depressed. I'm never a fan of authors using a ton of profanity, but it just works in this book and makes the main character's voice that much more authentic. If swearing bothers you, though, you probably won't enjoy this book. I can't say much about the story. There's not much there. A kid flunks out of college and takes a little trip just bumming around until he goes back home. The way it is told, though, was fantastic. It's told in first person, so the protagonist is the narrator. The voice is insanely authentic. It just flows, like the kid is sitting across from you, telling you the story. I can see why people might hate this book or find it pointless because there's not much story there, but I found it to be an incredibly enjoyable character study. The voice J.D. Salinger pulls off in this novel is prodigious. It's not easy to make it come off so natural, like someone is just talking to you, telling you their story. I can see why this book is considered a classic for the reasons I've listed above. I mostly read science fiction and fantasy adventures. This book was so different. It was a refreshing palate cleanser. I'm glad I finally picked it up to see what it was all about. Now I know who Holden Caulfield is. I've heard that name many times, but never knew who he was. Now I do, and in a big way, because this book fleshes him out brilliantly. He's the main character of this book. He's a kid who needs to figure his life out and become an adult, but he doesn't want to. Not because he's immature, but because he wants to hold on to the innocence of childhood. He was an awesome character to get to know. You get to know him really well as a very unique and likable person over the course of the story. It was a pleasure to read. What else do I want to say about this book? Well, there's a few things I think make this book, or made this book for me, such a good read. One, I think, is just when a book has authenticity and you just feel like the character is real. I would say, like in a lot of Stephen King novels, I feel like I know the characters as people in my actual life when I'm done reading the book. Someone who's really good at characterization. Well, you get that in this book through the voice of the protagonist as the narrator, and I actually really like first-person narrative and novels in first person. Sometimes it's kind of refreshing to read a small story, a story that is not grand in scope, with so many characters. You have to flip to the back of the book to remember what this guy is, who that lady was, how this country, all the things. But in this book, you're just with the character, and everything's laid out because you are hearing his thoughts throughout his short amount of time over which the story takes place. And I don't know, there's just something great about that. And I think I had been listening to a lot of Brandon Sanderson at the time, whom I love, and I think he's a brilliant author, and I love getting cozy with one of his epic fantasy novels for hours and hours. Like the audiobooks are like 45 hours long. The paperbacks are like door stoppers, and they're amazing. But so was The Catcher in the Rye, because of the authenticity. And I would say the other thing is just when you kind of quickly can get the character and you get their personality, their mood, their tone, their problems, and you're just there. You're there with them as the story unfolds. I don't know. I like things that are weird, like music. I like to listen to the NPR Tiny Desk concerts because there are often artists on there and they're insanely talented, but they're playing a musical genre I either can't place or it's a mix of a whole bunch of different ones. And it's like nothing that I would ever hear on the radio for the most part. And that's how this book was for me. If you were to describe The Catcher in the Rye, I would say that does not sound like a book I would enjoy or one that matches my taste in books. I don't like tons of coarse language, but that authenticity was there. And it's just so nice to, by reading a book, spend time with interesting characters. I think it expands your way of thinking. It helps you learn to think as other people think. And it's just, honestly, I feel like a great gift that you can receive from an author when you read their book. So that's why I like to read classics and even some literary fiction, even though my personal preference would be genre fiction, speculative fiction, sci-fi and fantasy, maybe some thrillers here and there, supernatural stuff, whatever. But I love spending time with interesting people, interesting characters. And if you read The Catcher in the Rye, if it happens to be for you, which it may not be, I think you'll really enjoy the book. Give it a try. It wasn't super long, so I think it's worth picking up. While I'm on the topic of book recommendations, lately I've been reading a ton of short books because in my life I've been very busy. I went through a huge life change. I moved to a different country and changed careers, and I struggled to find time for fiction. So one of my favorite things in the world is that feeling you get when you finish a book. So lately I read The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. I finished the first Keeper of the Lost Cities book by Shannon Messenger. I'll be reviewing that later. The Art of War, The Call of the Wild by Jack London was insanely good. And then the Dresden Files books, which aren't super short, but they're fairly short. Anyways, I recommend all of those books. I don't have anything else to say about The Catcher in the Rye other than, like me, if you're curious, it's just a nice thing to understand why a book is a classic. And when I've heard of the title of a book for so many years, I just grow more and more curious about it, and I'm like, I want to know what that book is about. So, if you've always wondered what Catcher in the Rye is about, give it a try. You might just love it, like I did. That's all I've got for you guys in this episode. We're going to keep making our way up to episode 100, and then start something new and exciting. If you want to know what I'm talking about, listen to the end of the last couple episodes, and I'll mention it there. But until next time, happy reading.
This podcast is brought to you by dandantheartman.com, where you can find more book reviews, entries on Dan's writing journey, and links to purchase Dan's books, like Haunted House Flipper or The Case of the Missing Snowman. Music by Dan Absalonson.